Hello there, and welcome to the Outside Views weekly magazine on global politics. Since yesterday, the meeting of the G7 foreign ministers is happening right here in my hometown of Münster in North Rhine-Westphalia in Germany. So, in the city where I'm filming my videos every day and this weekly magazine every week. I went to the city center yesterday on the first day of the meeting to get you some impressions of the atmosphere and the locations there. I filmed that after filming the rest of this video, so at least I can't spoil now what I could film with all the security in place, but it will be at least some really great views of our historical city center and the town hall with the Hall of Westphalian Peace. That's the town hall where I usually sit during council sessions as deputy district mayor. You will find these impressions at the end of this video after, let's say, the normal topics. And now, let's get on with the weekly news on global politics. An official inquiry has delivered a damning verdict on a deep-rooted sexist culture in the police force in England and Wales. Failed checks and omissions have resulted in potentially thousands of officers on duty who behaved like predators towards women. That's according to a study by the UK regulator HMI CFRS. It's too easy for the wrong people to join the police force and stay there, said HMI CFRS Inspector Matt Parr. A culture of misogyny, sexism and predatory behavior towards female police officers and members of the public is rife within the police force, they say. Officials would abuse their power to unfairly stop women in booty checks, as they call it internally. Police crimes such as sexual assault are covered up and ignored. The sentence against two men, one acting police officer, one former, who exchanged sexist and racist messages in chat groups is also to be passed. The study was commissioned after the murder of Londoner Sarah Everard. A police officer kidnapped, raped and murdered the 33-year-old in March 2021 using his service ID. The case had lastingly shaken confidence in the police. Had measures been taken earlier to improve pre-employment checks, it would have been significantly more difficult for people like the Everard killer to get a job as a police officer, they say. Interior Secretary or Home Secretary Suella Braverman said the reports shed a strong light on the problems. It's unacceptable that women continue to experience misogynist and sexist behavior, but her party is doing that too, by the way. And according to the South Korean military, North Korea may have also fired an ICBM towards the open sea during new missile tests. North Korea fired at least 3 ballistic missiles Thursday morning. One of it appeared to be a long-range missile. That's what the South Korean Armed Forces General Staff said. All 3 were flying towards the Sea of Japan. The Koreans see it as the East Sea. Japan's government in Tokyo also announced that one of the missiles had disappeared from radar over the Japan Sea. There has been no damage in Japan from missiles, but residents in some northern, eastern and central Japan prefectures had previously been asked to remain in their homes for safety. Defense Minister Yasukatsu Hamada said the first missile was launched around 7:40 a.m. local time. The potential trajectory could have sent the missile flying over Japan, but it disappeared from the radar over the Japan Sea. The reason for the disappearance from the radar is still under investigation, they say. On October 4th, a North Korean missile will fly over Japan again. Probably. Despite internal criticism, the self-declared nuclear power North Korea has been carrying out missile tests at an unusually high frequency since the end of September. According to South Korean information, the country had only fired more than 20 missiles on the east and west coasts on Wednesday. The new North Korean missile tests were seen in South Korea in response to the largest Air Force exercise by South Korean and US forces in several years. North Korea had accused the two countries of reckless military provocations and threatened countermeasures. The multi-day exercises in South Korea continue until today. 6 days before the congressional elections, US President Joe Biden warned of a threat to democracy in America. With haunting words, he called on voters to cast their ballots on November 8th and to reject election deniers and politically motivated violence. In a normal year, we don't face the question of whether the vote was cast preserves democracy or endangers it. That's what Biden said at a Democratic campaign event in Washington. But this year we are, he said. Biden pointed out that next Tuesday's election will be the first US election since violent supporters of ex-President Donald Trump stormed the US Capitol on January 6th in 2021. I wish I could say that the attack on our democracy ended that day, but I can't, he said. In the upcoming US elections, candidates at all levels are standing for election who do not want to commit themselves to accepting the results of the elections in which they are voting. Biden's Republican predecessor Trump has refused to recognize his defeat in the 2020 presidential election. Without any evidence, he continues to claim that he was deprived of a victory by electoral fraud. And following this example, individual Republicans running for mandates or offices in the midterm elections on November 8 leave it open whether they will accept the outcome of the election in any case. All 435 seats in the House of Representatives and about a third of the seats in the Senate will be up for grabs in the midterm elections in the US next week. Gubernatorial elections and votes on other posts are also pending in numerous states. Biden, who otherwise always emphasized the importance of compromise and cooperation across party lines, had recently sharpened his rhetoric and attacked Trump and his supporters more directly than ever. In a speech in Philadelphia in September, he called on Americans to take a stand against extremism in the now upcoming midterm elections. Trump and the so-called MAGA Republicans stand for an extremism that threatens the foundations of the republic. In his speech this week, Biden said MAGA Republicans, while a minority, are a powerful force in the Republican Party. Their false claims of the stolen 2020 election have also led to a dangerous rise in politically motivated violence in the USA. And according to the USA, North Korea secretly sold a significant quantity of artillery shells to Russia. US National Security Council spokesman John Kirby said the country was trying to cover up the supplies by channeling them through countries in the Middle East and North Africa. Our evidence suggests North Korea is shipping secretly, and we will be monitoring to see if the shipments are arriving. That's what Kirby said on Wednesday. The quantities are not insignificant, but cannot change the dynamics of the war. Given the effectiveness of international sanctions against Russia, leaders in Moscow must turn to states like North Korea and Iran to continue their war of aggression against Ukraine, Kirby said. Pyongyang had already denied rumors of an arms deal with Moscow in September. We have never exported arms or ammunition to Russia, and we have no plans to export them, they say. After the invasion, the largely isolated North Korea pledged its political support for the Moscow leadership's course. Because of its nuclear weapons program, North Korea is itself subject to international sanctions and practically excluded from the world trade. Kirby said concerns had increased in recent months over the possibility of Russian nuclear weapons being used. We are watching it as best we can, he said. And meanwhile, Russia is again participating in the grain agreement with Ukraine, but reserves the right to withdraw again. The Ethiopian civil war parties have agreed on a ceasefire almost 2 years after the fighting began. A new era is now beginning in Ethiopia, said African Union mediator Olusegun Obasanjo on Wednesday in Pretoria in South Africa. The agreement signed by both parties to the civil war will start the peace process. This will enable the return to law and order and clear the war for humanitarian aid. The representative of the Ethiopian government demanded that everyone must now adhere to the spirit of the agreement. A spokesman for the rebels from the province of Tigray assured that they were ready to walk the path of peace. The peace talks began about a week ago in South Africa. Leading African states and others like the US and the European Union had called for a ceasefire and the start of negotiations to avert further suffering for civilians. The fighting that broke out in November 2020 stems from long-standing rivalries between regional powers vying for supremacy in Ethiopia. The rebels of the Tigray People's Liberation Front, or TPLF, accused Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed of centralizing power at the expense of Ethiopia's regions. Abiy denies this and in return accuses the TPLF of wanting to regain power in the country. The TPLF was the dominant force in the state until Abiy was elected Prime Minister in 2018. Fighting in Africa's second most populous country has displaced millions and killed thousands of civilians. There's famine in parts of Tigray. In Iran, 7 protesters have been sentenced to death. It is said to be 6 people who took part in the current protests and 1 from the time of the November 2019 protests, according to several international journalists on Twitter. The trials are said to have lasted less than 10 minutes in some cases and took place without a lawyer for the convicts. One of the convicts is said to be 17 years old. That's what journalist and political scientist Gildas Sabeh reported on Twitter. He was apparently convicted of depravity on earth. According to the human rights organization Haba.help, countless detained demonstrators and journalists are also at risk of death sentences. Among them are the journalist Niloufar Hamedi and Elahe Mohammedi, who were among the first to report on the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini. A few days earlier, journalists and activists had drawn attention to the impending death sentences. For 6 weeks, there have been protests against the authoritarian style of government and the Islamic Republic in Iran. The trigger was the death of the young Iranian Kurd Mahsa Amini. She died in police custody on September 16th. She had previously been arrested by the Vice Squad for allegedly violating Islamic dress codes. Amini was arrested by the Vice Squad in September, allegedly for not wearing her headscarf properly. She died a short time later in hospital, and activists accused the authorities of abusing the 22-year-old before her death. According to British intelligence services, Russian troops are making extremely slow progress in their attacks in Ukraine. The Ministry of Defense in London referred on Wednesday to statements by the head of the Wagner mercenary group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, according to which his units advanced 100 to 200 meters a day. Prigozhin did say that this is normal in modern warfare. However, the British ministry emphasized that Russian military doctrine provides for advances of 30 kilometers per day. For comparison, the agency said, in February, Russian forces planned a 1,000-kilometer advance through the Ukraine within a month. In September, Ukrainian units achieved advances of more than 20 kilometers per day. In the past 2 months, Prigozhin has given up any pretense that he has no connection to the Wagner group and has spoken out much more publicly, the ministry said. He's probably trying to brush up on his credibility within the stressed-out Russian national security system. The British Ministry of Defense has published daily information on the course of the war since the start of the Russian war of aggression at the end of February, citing intelligence information. With this, London wants to counter the Russian portrayal of events and keep allies in line. Moscow speaks of a disinformation campaign, of course. Since the collapse in Russian supplies, natural gas from Qatar has been in high demand. Qatar's energy minister is now warning Europe of a price cap. Qatar's energy minister Saad Al-Kaabi has sharply criticized the proposals for a European price cap. The plans are hypocritical and would counteract the current competition rules, he said in an interview with the news channel Bloomberg TV. Al-Kaabi warned that capping gas prices could prevent European buyers from accessing natural gas supplies when competing importers bid more for the fuel. In addition, such price fixing would reduce the incentive to invest in gas production. The free market is always the best solution, said Al-Kaabi, who is also the head of the state-owned company Qatar Energy, the world's largest producer of liquefied natural gas or LNG. A price cap for gas has been demanded in the EU for months. The conclusions of the last EU summit on the subject speak of a temporary dynamic price corridor for gas trading, which, however, must not endanger the security of supply, whatever that means. There is disagreement in the EU about how comprehensive a gas price cap should be. After a meeting with European colleagues last week, the Czech Energy Minister Josef Sikala spoke of radically different perspectives among the member states. Opponents of a price cap like Al-Kaabi argue that third countries would then be more likely to sell the gas to other countries. And he said that include to Federal Minister of Economics Robert Habeck as well. Habeck had recently spoken out in favor of mandatory joint gas purchasing, but against a price cap. Joint purchases are the most effective way to lower prices, he said. Europe has great market power. A gas price cap, on the other hand, is not the right instrument, he said. Kamikaze drones have been destroying Ukrainian infrastructure for weeks. Now a drone manufacturer wants to make their defense cheaper and more efficient. And that's the Turkish combat drone manufacturer Baykar. They soon want to be able to fend off kamikaze drones in Ukraine. That means the Iranian drones deployed by Russia, which have been destroying critical infrastructure in Ukraine for weeks. The company's managing director, Haluk Bayraktar, told the German press agency that with missile equipment, drones would then be able to fight aircraft and helicopters in addition to enemy drones. We are already conducting tests, said Bayraktar at a trade fair in Istanbul, as reported by the Turkish newspaper Daily Sabah. Specifically, it's about the models Baykar TB2 and Akincis. The TB2 has been used by the Ukrainian army against the Russian invaders since February. During the Saha Expo trade fair, the drone manufacturer Baykar and the Turkish missile manufacturer Roketsan signed a cooperation agreement to equip the unmanned drones with missiles. Roketsan General Director Murat Ikinç sees this as a decisive step in warfare. With the armed drones, Ukraine can establish a cost-effective air patrol concept instead of using expensive air-to-air missiles. These are fired in the air to hit targets in the air. According to the report, Ukraine is currently trying to intercept kamikaze drones deployed by Russia with fighter jets. The use of drones is considered a cheaper solution. Moscow's recent introduction of Iranian Shahed 136 drones had complicated the situation for Kiev. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky warned of a major catastrophe if the wave of kamikaze attacks on power plants continued through the winter. The kamikaze drones are slow, noisy, and deployed at low altitudes, making them easy targets, is what Bayraktar said. The Baykar company wants to set up a production facility in Ukraine within a year also. Last week, Managing Director Bayraktar had already asked Germany to be more willing to cooperate. Any concerns about Turkey should be dispelled. Germany is very limited in terms of defense technology, he said. Around 70 people were arrested in Egypt in the run-up to the UN climate conference COP27. That's what the German press agency learned from security circles on Sunday. In addition, security forces sometimes demanded ID cards from pedestrians and checked their cell phones arbitrarily, they said. Human rights lawyer Mohammed Ramadan told the Mada Masra news site that hundreds had been arbitrarily arrested in the coastal city of Alexandria. The background is calls for protests in the country on November 11th. The so-called COP, that's the Conference of the Parties, begins on November 6th in the Egyptian seaside resort of Sharm el-Sheikh. There, representatives from around 200 countries want to debate for 2 weeks how global warming can be curbed. Protests by climate protection activists, for example, are permitted in a specifically set up zone next to the conference center. Otherwise, demonstrations are effectively forbidden in Egypt. Calls for protests on November 11th and thus during the COP have been circulating on social media for days. One of the flyers speaks of the last chance to save Egypt. A hashtag with the words "We all against Sisi" also made the rounds in reference to President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. Previously, there was talk of a planned climate revolution on November 11th. On this day, US President Joe Biden is expected at the conference in Sharm el-Sheikh. The US Embassy in Cairo also pointed out that there had been calls for demonstrations. Al-Sisi came to power in 2013 after an army putsch and has ruled the country with an iron fist ever since. There is no serious political opposition. Freedom of speech and freedom of the press have been massively curtailed. Human rights activists repeatedly report violations by security forces, some of which are serious, such as torture and extrajudicial killings. The government has promised improvements. However, organizations such as Amnesty International continue to describe the human rights situation as catastrophic. Switzerland sent hundreds of arriving migrants who want to travel to other countries to Basel on the border with Germany and France. The police in the canton of St. Gallen confirmed the practice to the newspaper NZZ. "We formally allow onward travel," they said. And now comes criticism from Germany. If these reports are correct, Switzerland will simply wave them through. That's what Andrea Lindholz, deputy leader of the Christian Democrat parliamentary group in the Bundestag, told the newspaper. National egoism is damaging the Schengen area. The Swiss TV magazine Rundschau showed at the beginning of October that the Swiss railway provider SBB provides migrants who arrive from Austria in Buchs in the canton of St. Gallen with their own wagons for the onward journey via Zurich to Basel. For Lindholz, SBB is thus promoting illegal entry into Germany. They called for the Swiss authorities to intervene. Switzerland must fulfill its obligations as a member of the Schengen area and take action against illegal migration. The Swiss State Secretariat for Migration sees no legal basis for detaining people. And before a Dublin procedure is through, which is intended to determine which country is responsible for conducting an asylum procedure, people have traveled farther a long time. No Dublin procedure can be carried out for people who are no longer present. That's what the spokesman for the State Secretariat for Migration told the newspaper. What a schmuck. The professor of migration law, Sarah Progin-Teuerkauf, described the forwarding of the migrants in the Rundschau program as a violation of the law, and that is not compatible with the Dublin Agreement. Because an asylum procedure must be carried out in the country in which a refugee demonstrably first entered. And another professor of migration law, Alberto Ackermann, sees things differently. Dublin only comes into play when a person applies for asylum. That's what he told the newspaper. The migrants who arrive in Buchs usually don't do that. So quite a tricky thing here. But the Swiss were always quite clever ones. Well, we'll see how far they can get with that. But now, let's see what happened on my little trip to the city center during the G7 foreign ministers meeting. Hello there. Today we literally have an outside view here, but right at the moment they are arriving, and that's a bit more problematic for what I wanted to show you when I came out of my studio after filming everything else today. The thing that is happening now is all the G7 foreign ministers are arriving right at the city hall, and so I will have to try to get a bit closer. But in the background you already can see the more historic parts of my hometown. At the moment there's also a demonstration because they are about to arrive, and that's another reason why it's harder to get close to it. But I will try, and we just have another very nice view here on the historical buildings, or the rebuilt in historical style buildings. We have here Münster was quite bombed when in the Second World War, but a lot has been built after that in the old style. We are not even close to the city hall now. We are. It's around the curve if you go to the left in front of those buildings. But when I'm standing here anyway, this is the Lamberti Church. This wonderful church has 3 cages up there. I hope you can see that. In those cages, the so-called rebaptizers who made themselves kings of Münster, that's where they were punished, and their bodies have been left up there until they fell apart piece by piece, until the cages were empty. And now we are around the corner, as I told you. This is the so-called Prinzipalmarkt that hundreds of years ago was the main marketplace of the city. That's why we still have on the city hall some markings for measurements and so on, made of iron and bronze. But here you can see the nice decoration for the G7 meeting, and they are arriving soon. But you see, there's a lot of police here, and obviously when a G7 foreign minister meeting is, there's a lot of security. What you hear in the background is the demonstration against the meeting. Unfortunately it's a bit noisy. I hope you still hear me enough and it is not too disturbing, but I can't avoid that on a day like this. But talking about the G7 ministers meeting here, it's quite unusual that they meet twice under one presidency, because usually there's only one meeting of the foreign ministers and then one meeting of the heads of state and government. But this time, because of the topics that are up to today, they had to meet twice. So now at least I managed to get to the side of the city hall, and there you see the historic Münster City Hall with a Hall of Westphalian Peace, where the 30-year war was ended here and in Osnabrück in Lower Saxony. With arriving soon, which I didn't know about the times when I had to finish my work in the studio, it obviously is a little bit more crowded, and it obviously is a little bit more fenced off at the moment, so we can't get that much closer. We are on the side. No, I wanted to talk about the 30-year war for 1 second longer. The 30-year war ended in 1648, and in the 30-year war that was raging all over Europe and killed a lot of civilians there, and the peace was made here. So it's very fitting that the conference during this devastating war in Ukraine is happening here. And I talked about the reason that they met twice a year, although it's so unusual, is of course for once the war in Ukraine, the war of aggression caused by Putin in Ukraine, and the energy crisis as a result of this war. And that is why the foreign ministers met twice under just one presidency, which is highly unusual. The view is not that great as if I'm standing right in front of it, or if I'm sitting right inside it, behind those large windows there, by the way. Right behind it is the hall where the city council meets and where I'm sitting as well. And if we go a little bit over here, you can probably see the balcony. That is for official occasions, but to be honest, during council sessions we use it as a smoking area, just to be frank. No, but it's a wonderful building outside and inside, and I cannot get you the view on the entrance of the Peace Hall, which is in the lowest floor there. We are just too far away.
So now that we are already on this side, I still wanted to show our wonderful cathedral here as well. You see that some TV stations are here, and that's our local TV station. That's also here and having cameras up there, and you see there's more and more people. By the way, that is where our Regierungspräsident is residing. He's not only responsible for Münster, but also for a whole part of the state. We have 6 of these presidents in my state of North Rhine-Westphalia, and you see even here, you see the EU flag and the Ukrainian flag at the moment. We all show support for the Ukraine. And on Carnival we do have a very nice party in here as well. It doesn't fit to the topic at the moment, but I had to add it because it's true. And you see there are trees inside the building. Can it get greener? No, but back to the cathedral. It's a lovely cathedral, and there you see the church where we first have been. That church was not built by the Catholic Church. It was built by the city merchants, kind of a competition to the cathedral. So it's a little fun fact as well. And if we would go down here, there's a brand new museum if you turn left at the end, and there is the room for all the press during this G7 Foreign Minister Conference, and about 220 journalists from all over the world are based there. In a few moments they are supposed to arrive. I will wait a few moments to see if I get a glimpse, although that was not initially my plan. I wanted to show you more of the locations, but let's see. So I got a little bit closer, but not much. From here you see the city, and on the left of the 2 buildings there mostly are council group sessions. There are the committees in session during normal weeks. Of course, this week there are no sessions on these days. You cannot see much for police at the moment, but you can see our mayor standing there. I hope you can zoom in a little bit. And he is definitely waiting for some of the foreign guests, so starting with the Annalena Baerbock, Foreign Minister of Münster. Yeah, that's pretty good. So, because at the time I arrived here, you see the Foreign Ministers arriving here. Outside the news is a little different. Political channel as you from news channels. Someone very interested in politics, various levels of politics. So session hall right above with the big windows where I'm usually sitting as well during council sessions, and the entrance is from the left building. And that's why they all will perhaps first of all see the Hall of Peace, and in the entrance hall where they get in there's the access to the Hall of Peace, and then they will probably move up the stairway to the left into the other building and the council session hall right above. So I think it's enough of filming for today. I just want to give you a hint in my weekly magazine. If they are coming to my hometown, then I should have included it, and I did with that video. You saw some arrivals. We can speculate about some in the comments tomorrow, and I hope that was something different this week to see that, and obviously I will be back on this channel next week, and in the meantime you know that the schedules and the video links or the channel links for all my other channels are in the video description, so visit me there too, and for now I'll see you in my next video. I'll be back.